Shalom, shalom. Call halal Yahweh by Shem Shah. All praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh in the name of His Son Yahweh Shah. Call halal Yahweh by Shem Shah Mashiach. Fisherman of Zion back with another video through the spirit and the power of Yahweh Shem Shah. Don't count this is a light thing to do. All praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh in the name of His Son Yahweh Shah. Call halal Yahweh by Shem Shah. All praises to Yahweh in the name of His Son Yahweh Shah. Call halal Yahweh by Hashem Yahweh Shah Mashiach. That is to say, all praises to Yahweh in the name of His Son Yahweh Shah. Yahweh, who we have power with as Israelites, the prince of the power that we have. We as Israelites are the princes. So we give all glory and honor to the Most High Yahweh in the name of His Son Yahweh Shah. Yahweh Shah, who the world understands as Jesus the Christ through the Spirit and the power of Yahweh by Hashem Yahweh Shah. I believe I titled this, Remember Judas Maccabeus. How can we forget what Caucasians did to Israelites and the temple? So peace and blessings to each and every one that will tune in, that will see this, Lord willing, now and later. And just coming out the new moon, the 10th month, just enter into the 10th month. All praises to the Most High for that. All praises to the Most High for all saints that are striving, keeping the commandments and the faith and the fear of Yahweh B'Shem Yahushua in these last days. Peace and blessings to you, the leaders and the elders in the nation as well. All praise to the Most High. Lord willing, y'all enduring. Lord willing, y'all striving to forsake the flesh more and more and renew your mind more and more and strive to continue to fear the Most High more and more in these last days. Don't count this as a light thing to do through the spirit and the power of Yahweh Shem Shah. So it is the Feast of Dedication. You know, going into the 8th day. It is an 8-day feast. If you don't know, as well as, you know, some people know it as Hanukkah. You know. So we're going to touch on, you know, some things about this beautiful day that the Most High has bestowed upon so-called Blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans to continue to keep and to continue to remember the things that we've overcame, as well as the Jews overcame, the Southern Kingdom overcame, the mighty men of the Most High have overcame a lot of great fights, you know, afflictions and things that we've had to deal with. But I want to get this right quick in the so-called New Testament. So let's go to St. John in the New Testament, chapter 10. The book of John, chapter 10. And I'm going to start at verse 22. Because the Messiah, he kept, you know, the dedication as well. And if the Messiah did that, you know, we have to pattern ourselves after him and follow the same things, you know. But a lot of people, they don't teach this. You know, they don't spread this truth to the utmost high to where we can understand it. Now this is St. John chapter 10, and I'm gonna start at verse 22, and it reads, and it was at Jerusalem the feast of the dedication, and it was winter. So this is a time period in December, November, December, you know, the winter time, you know, and you see these feasts that we've kept and that we continue to keep in Leviticus, but you don't see the Feast of Dedication in Leviticus. Now I want to get this in Leviticus chapter 23, and I want to start at verse 1. Leviticus 23 and verse 1, and it reads, it says, and the Lord Yahweh spake unto Moses, saying, speaking to the children of Israel, and saying to them concerning the feast of the Lord Yahweh. So you might hear other people that aren't Israelites keep Hanukkah, you know, and you can also say Hanukkah. You know, you might see other people keep Hanukkah. They don't even associate themselves as being an Israelite. You know, and the Lord just said in Leviticus the 23rd chapter, He spoke to the Israelites. You know, but the world has philosophized and deceived everybody into thinking that this is for everybody. But the truth be told, it's not for everybody. You know. How can a Caucasian celebrate a day where his ancestors, you know, had that day associated with killing one another, you know, had that day associated with not wanting the Israelites to keep their laws, statutes, and commandments, you know, having that day where, you know, keep it in their context, the Greeks was hanging babies, you know, they was killing women, and we're gonna go into these things that, you know, Caucasians did to the Israelites, and not only did to the Israelites, but did to the place where they went to worship the Most High at. So the Most High said this feast day is only for Israelites. So let's read it again. Leviticus 23:1. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, speaking to the children of Israel, and saying to them concerning the feast of the Lord Yahweh, which ye shall proclaim to be holy convocations. Even these are my feasts. So normally on a feast day, you will have, Israelites coming together because it's a holy convocation. Convocation means you gathering together. So it's not just a time period where you eating and you drinking and you having a good time. It's also included with you remembering what the Most High has delivered you from. So like Passover. Passover is a feast day. But that's just not the time period where we eat lamb and we drink wine. We remember what the Lord has brought us through and brought us from, But what is this society do? They say, okay, you can keep Christmas. And that day is solely based on some lies that they spew behind it. So when we keep our feast days according to the Bible, it's due to the Most High delivering us from oppression, delivering us from our enemies. And that's all throughout the Bible, That's why we keep Passover. Passover is not only us eating lamb and drinking wine. It also goes into the Messiah being our atonement. It also goes into the 10 plagues being put on the earth for the Israelites to escape the Egypt strongholds. Pharaoh having us enslaved, putting us through all type of hell, high water. So just like Feast of Dedication, it's a time period where we don't just eat, we don't just drink, we don't just come together and play music. We remember what the Most High has brought us through. Remember what the Most High allows us to overcome. Remember what the Most High has granted us to have. These laws, statutes, commandments, hope, having faith, having our brothers, fight for us, having our elders and our leaders fight for us. We don't just read the Bible and eat and drink. We also have to be in the spirit of what our forefathers stood for, what our ancestors stood for, So Leviticus 23:3, it says, 6 days shall work be done, but the 7th day is the Sabbath of rest and holy convocation. Ye shall do no work therein. It is the Sabbath of the Lord in all your dwellings. These are the feasts of the Lord Yahweh, even holy convocations, which ye shall proclaim in their seasons. So even the Sabbath day, because the first day of the Feast of Dedication is a Sabbath day, and the 8th day of the Feast of Dedication is a Sabbath day. And not just only a feast day, but when you look into the Sabbath, that's also going into you remember that the Most High gave us this day for us to occupy ourselves in the Word, occupy ourselves with not being stressed out by 6 days of work, occupy ourselves and reading the law, occupy ourselves and ordering our household right and doing things in a sense of obedience, and keeping Him at the forefront, the Most High Yahweh and Yahweh Shah, So a feast day is something that the Most High has given us, as well as the new moon, because when you understand the new moon as well, let me get this in Sirach, because it is the 10th month. This is in the Apocrypha Ecclesiasticus chapter 43. And for those that may be new, because we just closed out camp, and there was a brother that didn't know nothing about the truth, didn't know nothing about Apocrypha. So you never know who you may come across that still don't know this, because everybody hasn't been sealed yet, So just because you're learning, just because you know this truth, there's still others that don't know this truth. There's still others that don't know about the Sabbath. There's still others that don't know about the feast days. There's still others that don't know about the fringes. Just because you felt like you capped out and you got to your ceiling, there's others that still don't even know yet. And just talk to a brother. He didn't know nothing about this. So that should still be a humbling aspect for you. On where you are in your journey. You may be in the truth, you may not be in the truth. So the Apocrypha, which includes the missing books, that they say is not canon, but we know that's a deception. Starts with First Esdras all the way to Second Maccabees. And what we're going to be reading from during this lesson is in First and Second Maccabees as well, as well as many other things in the so-called New Testament. So this is Sirach in the Apocrypha, which understood as Ecclesiasticus chapter 43, and I'm gonna start at verse 6. It says, "He made the moon also to serve in her season, for a declaration of times and a sign of the world. From the moon is the sign of feast, a light that decreases in her perfection." So the Most High can give us a feast, not only for us to eat and drink and come together, but also to remember what he has magnified on the earth. Because the Most High also said, allow his deeds to be made known, amongst the people, you know. So the Messiah kept the Feast of Dedication. So let me read this again. St. John chapter 10, verse 22. And it says, "And it was at Jerusalem, the Feast of the Dedication, and it was winter. And Yahushua walked in the temple in Solomon's porch. Then came the Jews round about him and said unto him, How long doest thou make us to doubt? If thou be the Christ, the anointed, tell us plainly." So it was appointed around that time that he kept the Feast of Dedication as well. So this is a time period, which is a beautiful time period, us remembering what Judas Maccabeus stood for, his zeal, his mindset, his spirit, his leadership, his might that he has put in the forefront to be magnified amongst his brothers and his nation. And this is what a mighty man should pattern himself after. You don't just only fight for your wife and your children as a man, but you might have to fight for your brothers and sisters. You might have to fight for those that want to sell out. You might have to do things that you may not even thought you could do, So I want to go back to the Apocrypha. Let's go to Sirach chapter 44, and I'm going to start at verse 1. Ecclesiasticus chapter 44 and verse 1. "And Lord willing, you're keeping the Feast of Dedication. We were supposed to do a video a little earlier, but we ran into some problems, especially me, I ran into, all type of hell that broke loose, Many things try to prevent me from keeping this 8-day period to the best of my ability. But hey, we gotta endure all things for the elect's sake, A little under the weather, had some stuff that kind of kicked off at my house, that try to prevent everybody from congregating. But hey, we still gonna press through. We still gonna get through this thing. We still gonna endure. If it be the Most High, you can't overthrow it. So this is Sirach chapter 44. And we're going to start at the top. Ecclesiasticus in the Apocrypha, chapter 44 and verse 1. And it reads, it said, "Let us not praise famous men and our fathers that begot us." So when we remember somebody, we're not just going to remember people that was dope dealers. And we're not just going to remember people that, signed their life away to record labels and people that was known for doing wicked things. We're going to praise the Most High for allowing us to have righteous things, for allowing us to have something that we can have hope in, because the Most High, he not only uses, Yahushua the Messiah, but he also used other mighty men that we can learn from. Moses, Samuel the prophet, Jeremiah the prophet, even the Maccabees, So this is remembering our forefathers, for what they done. Like the title said, remember Judas Maccabeus, because he a mighty man, that was selfless, didn't put himself first, was willing to die for righteousness, So this is chapter 44 verse 2 in Ecclesiasticus. It said, "The Lord hath wrought great glory by them through his great power from the beginning, such as did bear rule in their kingdoms." So Judas Maccabeus was, appointed, and he learned from his father Mattathias, which we're going to read about in the Maccabees right quick. Their father taught them many things. Their father laid the foundation down, instilled great confidence in them, instilled great principles in them. And before he died, he gave them, many things to look into, which we all should do. Myself, having, sons, as well as if you have children, you should be able to instill great things into them, like Mattathias did as well, and like King David did. You know, before King David died, he told Solomon, he said he went all the way of the world. He's seen many things. He experienced many things. And what King David told Solomon, he said, keep the charge of the Most High. You know, do things right. You know, move in the spirit where you could be confident in the laws, statutes, and commandments, and having hope in the Lord. You know, so the Most High, he wrought great glory, you know, through our forefathers. So, you know, Judas Maccabeus was establishing his reigning, his rulership around 166 to 160 BC, as we know as the Hasmonean dynasty. You know, during that period where they was in rulership, taking over parts of Jerusalem, taking over parts where the heathen wanted to overthrow those areas. You know, because during that time you had the Greeks, Alexander the Greek, which you can read about in Daniel. You know, it speaks about that leopard, which also is known as the Greeks, when they was in rulership. You know, because the Most High said, if a kingdom be divided against itself, it cannot stand. You know, so Satan going against Satan. So the Greeks was fighting against each other. You had the Ptolemy kings fighting against the Seleucid kings. You know, so Alexander the Great, you know, as some call him Alexander the Freak, because he was a homosexual, he was overthrowing many other parts of his own nation, his own people too. You know, Sirach chapter 44 verse 3, it says, such as did bear rule in their kingdoms, men renowned for their power, giving counsel by their understanding, and declaring prophecies, leaders of the people by their counsels. And that's what the Maccabees was about. They was leaders of their people. You know, they put the laws in front. They put fearing the Most High in front. You know, it says, Sirach 44:4, leaders of the people by their counsels and by their knowledge of learning, meet for the people, wise and eloquent in their instructions. And so they gave instructions. They gave the sense, okay, we're going to fight, you know, which you had a period of Israelites, you know, that was over righteous, you know, and they were saying, well, we're not going to fight on the Shabbat. We're not going to fight on the Sabbath. And then Judas Maccabeus stood up in that time period and said, if we don't fight, they're going to overthrow us. You know, they're going to overthrow our country. You know, they're going to overthrow all of us. So therefore we best fight, you know. At least we be rooted out by this wicked nation. So I also want to get Psalms real quick. So let's go to Psalms, you know, because, hey, we got to remember Judas Maccabees. We got to, you know. That's why the Most High has each and every season appointed with something that we can remember the word with, you know. You got coming up, you know, we got 2 more months before, you know, a little over 2 more months before we enter into a so-called new year. You know, it's the 10th month, so, you know, we got the 11th month, then we got the 12th month. And then we're going to come up on the time of March and April. You know, during that time, you know, you got to remember what the Most High has done. He sent the death angel out. He sent the 10 plagues out. And then after that, you know, you got a time period where in between that, you got different months that come in, which we keep the new moons. And then, you know, we got all of these feast days to remind us and allow us to keep our minds sharp on what the Most High has done. There's no way and no reason for us to forget anything the Lord has done. Now, let me get this real quick. I want to get this in the book of Job. I also want to get one in Deuteronomy as well. So this is the book of Job, chapter 8. And I'm going to start at verse 8, and it reads, it says, for inquire, I pray thee, of the former age. So, hey, we got to even think back to, you know, thousands of years ago, you know, during the time period where Moses was in, during the time period where Joshua was in, during the time period where Samson was in, during the time period where Malachi was in. You know, we can't just stop in the New Testament. We even got to go back and think on the former age, because there's so many things that this society and this world don't want us to remember and don't want us to take hold on, because the truth was very magnified back in those days. You know, the truth was a wildfire. You know, that's why they doing so much now to erase our history. You know, they did many things to prevent us from knowing who we are. You know, And they override so many things with this technology and this AI and this sorcery and this witchcraft, and it causes you to be in a state of being in current modern times where you don't even gravitate towards the things that made sense back in those days, you know. So this is Job chapter 8 verse 8. It says, "For inquire, I pray thee, of the former age, and prepare thyself to the search of their fathers." You know, so our fathers in the days of old, you know, they stood on business. You know, they didn't sell out. They wasn't effeminate. You know, they wasn't soft. You know, they stood on business. And that business was the Most High's business. Righteousness, truth, love, peace, long-suffering, joy. You know, loving your people, loving your brothers, loving your sisters. You know, let me get another one, Deuteronomy 32. You know, so we got to remember what our forefathers did. You know, Deuteronomy chapter 32. I'm going to start at verse 7, and it reads. It says, "Remember the days of old. Consider the years of many generations." You know, so we should be still sharp with the history of what we've was taught back in the old days. You know, and some of us may not have been taught the history of the old, but now we still can have the Spirit remind us of what was going on in the days of old, because that's what the Most High promised us. And when you read St. John 14:26, it said the Holy Spirit will teach you, will bring things back to your remembrance. You know, let me get that real quick. You know, that's what the Holy Spirit does. You know, it sharpens your wisdom. It sharpens your knowledge, your understanding. Now, this is St. John chapter 14. You know, so how can we forget what the Caucasians did? You know, so this is St. John chapter 14, and I'm going to start at verse 26, and it reads, "But the Comforter, which is the Holy Spirit," it says Holy Ghost, but we understand it's the Spirit, "whom the Father will send in my name, he shall teach you all things." You see that? "And bring all things to your remembrance, whatsoever I have said unto you." So if you got the Spirit of the Most High, for one, like it says in Revelation chapter 19 and 10, you're going to utter prophecy. You know, you're going to be in prophecy, especially if you believe on Yahweh Shai the Messiah, Hamashiach. You know, you're going to utter prophecy. You're going to study prophecy. You're going to speak prophecy. You're going to teach prophecy. You know, you're going to learn prophecy. You know, as well as the feast days, as well as your commandments, your laws, your statutes, your judgments. You're going to have these things in your remembrance, you know, or else the world, they want you to forget it, like it never happened, like it was nothing, you know, like it was gone, you know, a long time ago, and you're not supposed to speak on it anymore. That is madness. That's wicked. You know, it just told us that the Holy Spirit is going to bring things back to our remembrance and teach us all things, you know. Let me get another one. St. John 15. This is St. John chapter 15. And I'm going to start at verse 26. It says, "But when the Comforter is come, whom I will send unto you from the Father, even the Spirit of truth." So this is the truth, you know. Feast of dedication. Remember what these Caucasians did to us. That's the truth, you know. That's not hate speech, you know. That's not just some false religion, you know. It's the truth, you know. Having the Spirit of truth, you're going to remember what went on in the 1600s, what went on in the 1400s, what took place in 330 BC, you know, what took place in 335 BC with Darius III. You know, you're going to remember what Antiochus Epiphanes the Fourth did. You're going to remember what Alexander the Great did. You're going to remember what the Ptolemy dynasty did, the Ptolemy bloodline. You know, the Seleucid bloodline. You know, you're going to remember what the Babylonians did. You're going to remember what the Assyrians did. You're going to remember what the Egyptians did. You know, you're going to remember what the Romans did. If you in that spirit, the spirit of truth, or else you're going to be caught out there. You're going to be hand joined in hand with your enemy. And sooner or later, he's going to stab you in your back. You know, which chapter 12, verse 10 told us to never trust our enemies. You know. If you got the spirit of truth, you're going to know who your enemy is. You're going to be taught. You're going to be, you're going to be led through by a teacher that the Most High has granted you, and you're going to be taught the truth. And you're not going to depart from it if you had a spirit of truth, or else you're going to be led away. You're going to be led astray. So the Most High said, St. John 15:26, it says, but when the Comforter is come, whom I will send unto you from the Father, even the Spirit of truth, which proceeded from the Father, he shall testify of me. You see that? And ye also shall bear witness, because ye have been with me from the beginning. So the spirit that the Most High has appointed certain individuals is the same spirit that he appointed from the beginning. They're not going to be led away by idolatry. They're not going to be, and if that's the case, they're going to repent. They're going to come up out of there quick. They're going to leave the world behind expediently, swiftly, quickly, So the Most High said in Deuteronomy 32:7, it says, remember the days of old, consider the years of many generations. Ask thy father, and he will shew thee thy elders, and they will tell thee. And we got elders in our nation that have continued to follow this path 30, 40, 50 years, and all praise to the Most High for the elders in our nation. They still teach the truth, and they still uphold the righteousness that was passed down from them until the next generation, So I'm going to get this in Psalms. So we remember Judas Maccabeus. We remember how he rededicated the second temple, and we remember how the Most High, in Matthew the 24th chapter, spoke on the desolations that they was going to make abominable, They was going to overthrow the temple. Daniel spoke about that. When you see the abomination of desolation that was spoken of by Daniel the prophet, Yahweh Shah spoke about these things, And so we understand prophecy was uttered, and now we living it out, and we waiting for these things to pass. So this is Psalm 37. Let me get this real quick. Psalm 37. So this is Psalm chapter 37 and verse 37, and it reads. So we're going to remember Judas Maccabeus. Psalm chapter 37, and I'm going to start at verse 37, and it reads, it says, mark the perfect man, and behold the upright, for the end of that man is peace. So the Most High commanded that we mark the perfect man. That man, he was a righteous man. That man, he was a austere man. That man, he didn't play no games. That man, he didn't do the work of the Lord deceitfully. That man, he did what he was supposed to do. Everything he said he was going to do, he did it. You got to mark certain men, You don't have to just mark them to say, okay, that person did me wrong. You got to be aware of a lot of things, And this is something you really got to do. You physically really got to do this. You got to mark people around you, If somebody around you say they're going to do something and they don't follow up and they don't do it, you got to mark that person, You got to mark that. And somebody do you wrong, and they apologize for it, and they say, well, you know what, look, I'm sorry for how I did that. I shouldn't have did that, but I just want to apologize. I want to keep it real with you, because that's not me. I had to check myself, and I had to get in the spirit, and I had to make things come to light that, hey, look, I was off for what I did. Hey, you got to mark that brother, that sister, that can put their pride and that proudness aside and say, hey, look, I was off. I was wrong. And then when you got somebody around you, or when you read about somebody that stood on business or being righteous and being blameless and fighting when they didn't have to, Judas didn't have to do the things he did, but he did. So you got to mark that man. You got to be aware of that. You got to take heed to that. Say, look, it's some things that he done that I need to do. It's some things that he done that I can learn from, So that's what it means to mark that man, You got to mark that perfect man. They fell short, but they got back up. We all going to fall short, We We all gonna fall short. But hey, it's room for improvement. It's room for growth. You know, it's always another day to get better and to get stronger and to get wiser, to get more mightier. You know. So Psalm 37 and 37 again, it says, mark the perfect man and behold the upright, for the end of that man is peace. But the transgressors shall be destroyed together. Who are transgressors? You know, who are transgressors? It said fall short of what? Hey, you could fall short of a lot of commandments. You know, you might have had a wicked thought. That's something you could have fallen short of. You know, you might have ran out of gas and then you had to buy something on the Sabbath. You could fall short of that. You could fall short of the Shabbat, the Sabbath. You know, there's many things we all fall short of. You know, the Most High might have had your spirit inflamed the day before and you didn't take advantage of that. You know, many ways we can fall short, whether you feel like that's over righteous or not. So going back, this is Psalms 37 and 38. It says, but the transgressors shall be destroyed together. And when you read First John chapter 4, 1 John chapter 3 and verse 4, it says, roughly paraphrasing, those that fall short of the law, statutes, commandments, transgress the law. You know, so transgressing the law would be an act of, if a blood was to come across a crip and he was to kill him, you know, that's going into the acts of murder. You know, thou shalt not murder. So you transgress the law. You know, so it says, but the Psalm 37 and 38, but the transgressor shall be destroyed together. The end of the wicked shall be cut off. But the salvation of the righteous is of the Lord Yahweh. You know, it says, and the Lord, it said, I was testing your spirit. The Lord said, try the spirit by the spirit. You know, 1 John, the 4th chapter. Try the spirit by the spirit. You know, ain't nothing wrong with trying the spirit by the spirit. You got to try the spirit by the spirit. You know, so the Lord said, Psalm 37 and 39 says, but the salvation of the righteous is of the Lord Yahweh. You know, he is their strength in the time of trouble. And the Lord Yahweh, and the Lord Yahweh shall help them and deliver them. He shall deliver them from the wicked and save them because they trust in him. And that's what Judas Maccabeus did. He trusted in the Lord. And we're going to read about a lot of things that man stood on. So I want to get this real quick. Our forefathers, they stood on business, you know. Now I want to read this right quick, because we just read the Lord fight for those that, you know, put their trust in him. So this is I'm not gonna read this whole thing, but I'm gonna get a couple verses. This is Exodus chapter 15, and I'm gonna start at verse 1. Exodus 15 and 1. It says, then sang Moses and the children of Israel this song unto the Lord Yahweh, and spake, saying, I will sing unto the Lord Yahweh, for he hath triumphed gloriously. The horse and his rider hath he thrown into the sea. And so this is after we came out of Egypt, you know. After we came out of Egypt, you know, we actually was in the spirit of singing songs, you know. The Most High is a man of war. You know, the Lord is glorious, you know, to that extent. So it says, Exodus 15 and 2, the Lord Yahweh is my strength and song, and he has become my salvation. He is my God. I will prepare him an habitation, my father's God, and I will exalt him. The Lord Yahweh is a man of war. The Lord Yahweh is his name, you know. So we even had Moses, you know, singing songs unto the Most High, you know. The women were singing unto the Most High, you know. And it's gonna come a time, we may have a new song, you know, Lord willing, of the elect. We can witness that, you know. So the Most High, He will fight for you. You know, he's a man of war, as we just read. Now, I also wanted to get this real quick. It's the book of Lamentations. It's the book of Lamentations, and I want to get this real quick. This is the book of Lamentations, chapter 3, and verse 55. It says, I called upon thy name, O Lord Yahweh, out of the low dungeon. So you're going to have to call upon the Lord, you know, because that's a commandment. Calling upon the Lord, that's literally a commandment. And it says, Lamentation 3 and 56, it says, thou hast heard my voice, hide not thy ear at my breathing, at my cry. It says, thou drewest near in the day that I called upon thee. Thou saidest, fear not. O Lord, thou hast pleaded the causes of my soul. Thou hast redeemed my life. So not just Jeremiah, not just Judas, Maccabeus, you know, not just Moses, you know, not just King David, you know, not just Elijah, but many of us also are going to have to call upon the Lord one day. One day, whether you believe it or not, whether you think it's coming or not, we all going to have to call upon the Lord. Not when our light bill is due, not when that mortgage is due, not when that car note need to be paid, you know, but it's going to come a day, a time, and a place where we all going to have to call upon the name of the Lord, you know. We all going to have to lift up our heads, our hands, and our faces and say, Yahweh B'Shem Yahushua, have mercy, save me, deliver me. You know, allow your will to be done. We all going to have to. You think Yahushua just going to look up on the cross? Let me get this real quick. You know, you think Yahushua just going to be at his last end according to his time period on the earth? You know, you crazy. You sadly mistaken. Now, I want to get this real quick. I want to get this precept real quick. This is St. John chapter 19, and let me see where I want to start at. I want to get this real quick. I want to find this precept. I want to read this in St. John, but I want to get this in Mark first. This is the book of Mark. Let me get this in the book of Mark. Mark chapter 15. This is the book of Mark, chapter 15, and I'm going to start at verse 29. It says, and they that passed by railed on him, wagging their heads, and saying, thou that destroys the temple and buildest it in 3 days. Because they thought he was saying he was going to destroy that temple that took years and years and years to build. They thought he was talking about a physical temple, which he was talking about the body. You know, it says, Mark 15 and 30, save thyself and come down from the cross. Likewise, also the chief priests, mocking, said among themselves with the scribes, he saved others. Himself he cannot save. Let Christ, the King of Israel, descend now from the cross, that he may see and believe. And they that were crucified with him revile him. So like revel him. Verse 33, Mark 15 and 33. And when the 6th hour was come, there was darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour. And at the 9th hour, Yahweh shall cry with a loud voice, saying, Elo, Elo, lama sabachthani, which is being interpreted, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? And some of them that stood by, when they heard it, said, behold, he calleth Elias. And one ran and filled a sponge full of vinegar and put it on a reed, and gave him to drink, saying, let alone, let us see whether Elias will come to take him down. And Yahweh shall cry with a loud voice and gave up the ghost. You see that? So, hey, even the anointed called on his father. You know, he even called on his father. So who are we to think we don't have to call on the Lord? You know, we got to call on the Most High. You know, let me get this right quick. We got to call on the Most High. Now, this is Psalms, because it's a commandment. There's going to come a day, a time, and a place where we're going to have to do this. Especially the times that we're coming upon, especially the days that is coming before us. You know, it's going to be more evils that's going to be multiplied on the earth than what it was when Alexander was in rulership. You know, there's going to be way more evils. You know, and like the words say, love wax cold in the last days. So this is Psalms 91, and I'm going to start at verse 14. It says, because he has set his love upon me, therefore will I deliver him. I will set him on high, because he had known my name. You see that? And knowing the Lord's name is not just Yahweh. It's not just knowing how to say Yahweh. It's not just knowing how to say Yahweh Shah. But it's knowing what comes along with that, you know, fearing the Lord, you know, having hope in the Lord, faith, you know, abstaining from wickedness, you know, because that's why we can't call upon his name in vain. You know, we can't put vain things upon his name. You call upon the Lord, but you're being a hypocrite. You calling upon the Lord, but you're watching pornography. You calling upon the Lord, but you freaking out. You're being a whoremonger. You know, you selling out. You're being hypocritical. You know, you calling upon the Lord, but you're really not living the life that he commands you to live. You know, kind of playing hopscotch. You over here 1 minute, you over there. You over here, you over there. You lukewarm. You're all over the place. You know. So Psalms 91 in 15, it says, he shall call upon me, and I will answer him and honor him. See that? So, hey, you do that, the Most High will answer you and honor you. You know? So let's go to 2nd Maccabees real quick. It's like First Maccabees, you know? So this is, remember Judas, you know? As we read, we got forefathers that the Most High has wrought great glory by them and shown his power through them. Now, this is in the Apocrypha, you know. So this is 1 Maccabees chapter 2, and I'm going to start at verse 1. It says, in those days arose Mattathias, the son of John, the son of Simeon, a priest of the sons of Joarib from Jerusalem, and dwelt in Modin. And he had 5 sons, Joanan, called Cadas, Simon, called Dasa, Judas, who was called Maccabeus, Eleazar, called Avaron, and Jonathan, whose surname was Alphaeus. And when he saw the blasphemies that were committed in Judah and Jerusalem, he said, woe is me, wherefore was I born to see this misery of my people and of the holy city, and to dwell there, when it was delivered into the hand of the enemy, and the sanctuary into the hand of strangers. So our enemies overthrew our country. You know, they overthrew the holy place, you know, where we was keeping the law, statutes, and commandments. Now I want to go up to 1 Maccabees, and I'm gonna start at chapter 1, verse 1. You know, to get a little bit more context, to get a little bit more understanding on who our enemies are. Now it reads 1 Maccabees chapter 1 and verse 1. It says, and it happened after that Alexander, the son of Philip, the Macedonian, who came out of the land of Shittim, and has smitten Darius, king of the Persians and Medes, that he reigned in his stead, the first over Greece. And so you read about this. Let me get this real quick. You read about this when you get to let me get this real quick. I'm not gonna go into a lot of this, you know, but we should get some videos on a lot of this history. Lord willing, we can do that in time to come, if it be at the Most High Yahweh by Shem Shah's will. Now I want to get this real quick in Daniel. I want to get this precept. So like I want to get straight to the point. precept. I just marked this the other day. I was just reading this the other day. But it always happens when I so like, let me read this right quick. I must have put it in my other sword. I'm trying to find this precept right quick. Let me get this precept, Salakia. Anyways, let me go to Revelation till I find that one in Daniel. This is the book of Revelation, chapter 13, and I'm going to start at verse number 2. Revelation chapter 13 and verse 2, and it reads, it says, and the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, and that's talking about the Greeks, and his feet were as the feet of a bear, and his mouth as the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power and his seat and great authority. So when you look into that statue in Daniel, you know, that's going into, let me see if I can get a picture. I might got a picture on this. It's always good to use visuals. Let me see if I can find this picture real quick. So when you get this picture right here, let me see if I can put this up. It's going into Daniel, the 6th and 7th chapter. You know. So right there, that's what that leopard that we were just reading about. Revelation 13. That's that leopard. And this is what we're reading about Alexander that gold. You know. So going back to first Maccabees. I think I might got another picture too. Let me see if I got another picture. So nah, it might be on my other phone. So going back to this is First Maccabees chapter 1 and verse 1, and it reads, it says, and it happened after that Alexander the son of Philip the Macedonian, who came out of the land of Shittim, had smitten Darius king of the Persians and the Medes, that he reigned in his stead, the first over Greece, and made many wars and won many strongholds and slew the kings of the earth, and went through to the ends of the earth and took spoils of many nations. So the history, you know, of the so-called white man fighting against the white man. And what did Yahweh Shah say about that? Let me get this real quick. Because Yahweh Shah also spoke that Satan's going to be fighting against Satan. You know, kingdoms against kingdoms. Let me get this real quick. Let me get this precept real quick in the Gospels. This is Luke chapter 11, and I'm gonna start at verse 17. It says, but he, knowing their thoughts, said unto them, every kingdom divided against itself is brought to desolation, and a house divided against a house falleth. If Satan also be delivered against himself, how shall his kingdom stand? Because ye say that I cast out devils through Beelzebub. And if I by Beelzebub cast out devils, by whom do your sons cast them out? Therefore shall they be your judges. But if I with the finger of Most High God cast out devils, no doubt the kingdom of God Most High is come upon you. So Satan was fighting against Satan, you know, overthrowing other countries. Now, also, I wanted to find that precept in Daniel that I was wanting. Now this is Daniel chapter 6. And I'm going to start at verse 25. It says, Then King Darius wrote unto all people, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied unto you. It says, I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom men tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. For he is the living God and steadfast forever, and his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall be even unto the end. He delivered and rescued, and he wrote, and he worked signs and wonders in heaven and in earth, who had delivered Daniel from the power of the lions. So this Daniel prospered in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. So of course they had Daniel, one of the Darius had Daniel in a position where he was calling shots. But just because he had Daniel in a position where he was calling shots, that doesn't mean that he wasn't his enemy, you know. And also, because the Darius that Alexander overthrew was Darius the third, but I wanted to get it's another precept, but I'm not gonna spend a lot of time trying to find it. But we're gonna go back to this right quick. First Maccabeus chapter 1 and 3 again. It says, and went through to the ends of the earth and took spoils of many nations, insomuch that the earth was quiet before him, whereupon he was exalted and his heart was lifted up. And so these heathens, they got pride, you know. They think they're God. They think they can overthrow God, you know. And that's why the Most High, like he did Pharaoh, he overthrew Pharaoh. Now I wanted to get this this precept as well. Now this is Joshua chapter 20. And that's why, like it says, Alexander's heart was lifted up. You know, that's the same way Pharaoh, his heart was hardened. Now this is Joshua chapter 20. And I'm going to start at verse 11 and it reads, it's like it. Joshua chapter 20. And I want to start at verse... I also wanted to get the one in Exodus 2. This is Joshua chapter, I want Joshua chapter 11. And then Joshua chapter 20. So Joshua chapter 11 and verse 20. And it reads, it says, for it was of the Lord to harden their hearts, that they should come against Israel in battle, that he might destroy them utterly, and that they might have no favor, but that he might destroy them as the Lord Yahweh commanded Moses. So they thought they could be very well against the Most High, because why? They mind were hardened. And let me get this real quick. Now let's go to Exodus. Now this is Exodus, and it's the same way these Edomites move in the spirit, and you know, and very well other Caucasians, you know, and another name for Caucasian, you know, because they are the same people, you know, just different tribes. You know, they didn't call themselves Caucasians in those days, you know, but you understand them as Greeks, you understand them as the Amalekites, you understand them as the French, you know. So this is Exodus. Let me see, I want to get this real quick. Exodus. Let me see, I want to get this specific precept. This is Exodus chapter 5, and I'm going to start at verse 1. It says, I'm going to start at verse 2. And Pharaoh said, who is the Lord, that I should obey his voice to let Israel go? I know not the Lord, neither will I let Israel go. And they said, the God of the Hebrews had met with us, let us go, we pray thee, 3 days journey into the desert, and sacrifice unto the Lord our God, lest we fall upon us the pestilence Least he fall upon us with pestilence, or with the sword. And the king of Egypt said unto them, wherefore do ye, Moses and Aaron, let the people from their works get you unto your burdens? So Pharaoh's heart was hardened. You know, his mind was made up that he wasn't going to let the Israelites go. You know, his mind was made up. Now, I also wanted to get one more precept. Now, this is Exodus chapter 7, and I'm going to start at verse 10. It says, and Moses and Aaron went in unto Pharaoh, and they did so as the Lord had commanded. And Aaron cast down his rod before Pharaoh and before his servants, and it became a serpent. Then Pharaoh also called the wise men and the sorcerers, now the magicians of Egypt. They also did in like manner with their enchantments, for they cast down every man his rod, and they became serpents. But Aaron's rod swallowed up their rods, and he hardened Pharaoh's heart, that he hearkened it not unto them, as the Lord Yahweh had said. You know, so hey, that's the same way that these other wicked nations have in their mind as well. You know, stuck in their ways. You know, they wicked, they vile. You know, so they heart was hardened. You know, and that's just the Most High showing his power. You know, so this is going back to this. This is First Maccabees chapter 1, and I want to go down. I'm gonna jump down to verse 7. It says, so Alexander reigned 12 years and then died. And his servants bare rule every one in his place. And after his death, they all put crowns upon themselves, because he had many places that he was in rulership of. You know, so he was able to have it divided into many others. You know, because of course he stole like we read in Mark chapter 15, Satan against Satan. You know, kingdoms against kingdoms. That's how he was able to have many crowns that was put on some of his men's head. So First Maccabees 1 and 9. And after his death, they all put crowns upon themselves. So did their sons after them many years, and evils were multiplied in the earth. And there came out of them a wicked root, Antiochus, surnamed Epiphanes, son of Antiochus, the king, who had been an hostage at Rome. And he reigned in the 137th year of the kingdom of the Greeks. You see that? So, of course, the Maccabees was fighting against the Greeks. Now, what's significant about this is around 332 BC, all the way down to when Judas Maccabees began to be in power, you know, overthrowing the Greeks, you know, because Alexander overthrew the Persians, which the Persians was during the time was 538 BC, all the way to the time he overthrew Darius, all the way to the time he began to multiply and increase his rulership, his kingdom. You know, so going back to this, First Maccabees 1 and 11, it says, in those days went there out of Israel wicked men, who persuaded many, saying, let us go and make a covenant with the heathen that are round about us, for since we departed from them, we have had much sorrow. You know, so you got many sellouts. You got many that's gonna tuck tail. They're gonna fold. You know, that's why it's important to remember Judas Maccabees, because this same fear could fall upon somebody that's beside you, or somebody that's, you know, trying to, you know, be more mighty within the understanding of being an Israelite, keeping the commandments, having fear for the Most High. Because if you don't fear the Most High, you know, you're fearing things that's very well not going to profit you anything. So this is I'm gonna go down real quick. I don't want to read this whole thing. So this is First Maccabees 1:13. It says, then certain of the people were so forward herein that they went to the king, who gave them license to do after the ordinances of the heathen, whereupon they built a place of exercise at Jerusalem, according to the custom of the heathen, and made themselves uncircumcised, and forsook the holy covenant, and joined themselves to the heathen, and were sold to do mischief. Now when the kingdom was established before Antiochus, he thought to reign over Egypt, that he might have the dominion of 2 realms. You see that? So when you go down to verse 40, before you get there, you start to begin reading about how they was overthrowing a lot of the Israelites. But I'm trying to read enough to get the understanding, because a lot of these chapters have like 60, 70 verses in them. So we're gonna go down to verse 30. First Maccabees 1:30. It says, and spake peaceable words unto them, but all was deceit. For when they had given him credits, he fell suddenly upon the city, smote it very sore, and destroyed much people of Israel. And when he had taken the spoils of the city, he set it on fire, and pulled down the houses and walls thereof on every side. But the women and children took they captive, and possessed the cattle. Then built they the city of David with a great and strong wall, and with mighty towers, and made it a stronghold for them. So they overthrew our city, Verse 34, and they put therein a sinful nation, wicked men, and fortified themselves therein. They stored it also with armor and victuals. And when they had gathered together the spoils of Jerusalem, they laid them up there, and so they began a sore snare, for it was a place to lie in wait against the sanctuary, and an evil adversary to Israel. Thus they shed innocent blood on every side of the sanctuary, and defiled it. So they shed innocent blood on the sanctuary and defiled the sanctuary. It says, verse 38, insomuch that the inhabitants of Jerusalem fled because of them. So you had many of our people that was fearful, And the Lord also told us that the fearful and unbelieving, he's going to do away with them. So what's very important about this is you cannot fear your enemy. You cannot fear his decrees. You cannot fear his legislations. You cannot fear his policies. You can't fear a man that doesn't have the ability to take away your soul. Like the word says, roughly paraphrasing, fear the one that's able to take the body and the soul and cast it out into outer darkness. So we're going to fear the Most High only. And we're not going to fear our enemies, because they can't do but so much. They can only do what the Most High allowed them to do. But you had many of the Israelites, they was fearing the enemy, So like, let me turn this on. So understanding this is very important. So like, I'm trying to turn this on right quick. So First Maccabees chapter 1 and verse 39, it says, her sanctuary was laid waste like a wilderness. Her feasts were turned into mourning, her Sabbaths into reproach, her honor into contempt, as had been her glory. So was her dishonor increased, and her excellency was turned into mourning. Moreover, King Antiochus wrote to his whole kingdom that all should be one people. And what does that sound like? That sound like the same thing that this society want to do. They want us to not worship Yahweh, but they want us to worship their God. They want us to conform to their religion, their society. The NWO, the New World Order that they've always upheld. It says And everyone shall leave his laws. So all the heathen agreed according to the commandment of the king. Yea, many also of the Israelites consented to his religion, and sacrificed unto idols, and profaned the Sabbath. For the king had sent letters by messengers unto Jerusalem and the cities of Judah, that they should follow the strange laws of the land, which is madness. I want to get a precept real quick. Let me get a quick precept right quick. Let's go to Romans. Let's go to the book of Romans real quick. It's the book of Romans, chapter 13, and I'm going to start at verse 1. It says, let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there is no power but of Most High God. The powers that be are ordained of God. You see that? So we're going to be subject unto the Most High Yahweh. We're not going to be subject unto the Greeks. We're not going to be subject unto, the Rothschilds. We're not going to be subject unto the Rockefellers. We're not going to be subject unto the, this wicked government, that say you can marry a tree. That say a man can marry a man, a woman can marry a woman. We're not going to be subject unto that. We're going to be subject unto Yahweh by Shem Yahushua. So they wanted us to leave our laws. They wanted us to cleave unto their heathenistic ways, And this is why it's so important to continue to move in this spirit during this time of the Feast of Dedication. Because it will remind you on how on fire our forefathers and our foremothers and our nation was, And this is why it's important for you to fear the Most High. Because even when your life is on the line, somebody can try to tell you, just eat the swine. It's gonna be all right. Just eat it, and they not gonna kill you. No, it's way bigger than that. We not simping and we not bowing down to nobody else but the Most High. Because you don't want people to make you think it's not important. You don't want people to make you think it's not that big of a deal. But it's a big deal. All the commandments is a big deal. Fearing the Most High is a big deal. When you bow down to an idol, that's a big deal. That's evil. That's wicked. When you conform to somebody else's ways and not the ways of the Most High, that's a big deal. That can get you put to death quick. So the Most High said, 1 Maccabees 1:45, it says, and forbid burnt offerings and sacrifice and drink offerings in the temple, and that they should profane the Sabbaths and festival days, and pollute the sanctuary and holy people, set up altars and groves and chapels of idols, and sacrifice swine's flesh and unclean beasts, that they should also leave their children uncircumcised, and make their souls abominable with all manner of uncleanness and profanation, to the end they might forget the law and change all the ordinances. And it reads, 1 Maccabees 1:50, and whosoever would not do according to the commandment of the king, he said he should die. So that's what they did. They threatened our lives. They wanted us to bow down to their decrees, and to give in to their sorcery, But we got to remember Judas Maccabeus. We got to, because he stood for something way mighty, way mightier than what a lot of our forefathers stand for today, So let's go to 2 Maccabees real quick. Let's go to 2 Maccabees, chapter 14, and I'm going to start at verse 10. 2 Maccabees chapter 14 and verse 10, it says, I'm going to start at verse 9. 2 Maccabees 14 and 9. It says, wherefore, O king, seeing thou knowest all these things, be careful for the country and our nation, which is pressed on every side, according to the solemnity that thou readily shewest unto all. For as long as Judas liveth, it is not possible that the state shall be quiet. So of course, the heathen knew that as long as Judas was alive, that he was going to overthrow them. He was going to kill him. He was going to be a representation. He was going to be a witness. He was going to be a covering for his people, you know. So it says, verse 11, this was no sooner spoken of him, but others of the king's friends, being maliciously sent against Judas, did more incense Demetrius. And forthwith calling Nicanor, who had been master of the elephants, and making him governor over Judea, he sent him forth, commanding him to slay Judas, and to scatter them that were with him, and to make Alchemus high priest of the great temple. Then the heathen that had fled out of Judea from Judas came to Nicanor by flocks, thinking the harm of the calamities of the Jews to be their wherefore. So, hey, they wanted to kill Judas, you know. And this is why it's important for us to remember Judas, because he put his life on the line, you know. He stood for something that we should all stand for, you know. Now, let me get, now, of course, like you read earlier, you know, you had many Israelites that sold out, you know, that was bowing down to idols, you know. Now, let's get this real quick in Leviticus chapter 5. In verse 1, it says, Leviticus 5:1, it says, and if a soul sin and hear the voice of swearing and is a witness, whether he has seen or known of it, if he do not utter it, then he shall bear his iniquity. So, hey, he kept the laws. Judas kept the laws. And he also warned them, you know. Now, let's get another one. Let's get Leviticus chapter 19. And I want to start at verse 17, and it reads, it says, I'm going to start at verse 16. Leviticus 19:16. It says, thou shalt not go up and down as a terror among thy people, neither shalt thou stand against the blood of thy neighbor. I am the Lord Yahweh. Thou shalt not hate thy brother in thy heart. Thou shalt in any wise rebuke thy neighbor, and not suffer sin upon him. Thou shalt not avenge nor bear any grudge against the children of thy people, but thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. I am the Lord Yahweh. So that's what our forefathers did. They loved the nation as they loved themselves. And anytime they seen our people going off, they made it aware. They brought it to light, you know, and they fought for the nation. So let me go back to this in Maccabees right quick. This is because Judas was on point, you know. He kept the law, you know, and there's many other laws that we can get to show what Judas actually did. But I want to continue on. Now let's get 2 Maccabees chapter 12, and I'm gonna start at verse 42. Now it says, matter of fact, I'm gonna start at verse 41. Yeah, this whole thing is mighty. I'm gonna start at verse 39. 2 Maccabees chapter 12 and verse 39. It says, and upon the day following, as the youths had been, Judas and his company came to take up the bodies of them that were slain, and to bury them with their kinsmen in their fathers' graves. You see that? So he took up the bodies of the Israelites that got killed, you know. That's why, hey, it's important for us to remember Judas Maccabees, because, hey, who also did that? Tobit did that too. He was bodying certain Israelites that was put to death, you know, because, hey, during the time of the Maccabees, you know, during the time of 300 BC, you had Israelites getting killed then too. You know, 400 BC, you know, 200 BC. Let me get this real quick. You know, Tobit was burying Israelites as well. And that's in the law. Now, this is Tobit chapter 2 in the Apocrypha, and I'm going to start at verse 6. Tobit chapter 2, verse 6. It says, remembering that prophecy of Amos, as he said, your feast shall be turned into mourning and all your mirth into lamentation. Therefore I wept, and after the going down of the sun, I went and made a grave and buried him. But my neighbors mocked me and said, this man is not yet afraid to be put to death for this matter. Salaki, who fled away, and yet, lo, he buried the dead again. You see that? So our forefathers, hey, they was burying the dead. You know, Tobit did that. You know, Tobit was doing that. And Tobit was not afraid of being put to death, and neither was the Maccabees. Were they afraid? You know. So going back to this, the 2nd Maccabees chapter 12, and verse 40, it says, now under the coats of every one that was slain, they found things consecrated to the idols of the Gemnites, which is forbidden the Jews by the law. Then every man saw that this was the cause wherefore they were slain. So when they was burying them and they uncovered their coats, you know, they seen that they had idols, and they seen that this was the reason why they got put to death. You know, because the Most High, he's going to judge those that need to be judged according to their doings, you know. And it also states that in, let me get this precept real quick. Let me get this real quick. You know, we just brought this out at camp, you know. We all gonna have to appear before the judgment seat, you know. So this is it also says that in I'm trying to remember this precept that I pulled today. It's not Timothy. I just pulled this precept today at camp. Let me see. Let me get this real quick. I just pulled this precept. Let me see. This is. So we all gonna have to appear. This is 2 Corinthians chapter 5, and I'm gonna start at verse 10. It says, for we must all appear before the judgment seat of Hamashiach, that everyone may receive the things done in his body according to that he had done, whether it be good or bad. And so that's what they got. They got their reward according to them holding on to those idols. So going back to 2 Maccabees chapter 12, and verse 41, it says, all men therefore praising the Lord, the righteous judge, because he is a righteous judge, who had opened the things that were hid, betook themselves unto prayer, and besought him that the sin committed might wholly be out of remembrance. You see that? And so that's why it's important for us to remember Judas, because he was praying, and not only him, but you know, the others that he chose to fight with him, they was actually praying that the Israelites that got put to death will be forgiven for the blasphemies that they committed, you know. And so that also is something we need to be aware of, that when our brothers go off, when you don't see your brother at camp with you, or when you don't see your brother doing videos like you, or when you don't see your sister or your nation being in the spirit that they should be in, you can pray and ask the Most High to forgive them, you know. So it says, Judas exhorted the people to keep themselves from sin. So like it, I'm gonna read this one more time. 2 Maccabees 12 and 42. It says, betook themselves unto prayer, and besought him that the sin committed might wholly be put out of remembrance. Besides that, noble Judas exhorted the people to keep themselves from sin, for as much as they saw before their eyes the things that came to pass for the sins of those that were slain. And when he had made a gathering throughout the company to the sum of 2,000 drachms of silver, he sent it to Jerusalem to offer a sin offering, doing therein very well and honestly, in that he was mindful of the resurrection. For if he had not hoped that they that were slain should have risen again, it had been superfluous and vain to pray for the dead. And also in that he perceived that there was a great favor laid up for those that died godly. It was an holy and good thought, whereupon he made a reconciliation for the dead, that they might be delivered from sin. You see that? And that's a mighty thing. You know, that's a very well mighty thing. Something we can remember that Judas stood on. Judas Maccabeus stood on. Now, I want to get another, 2 Maccabees chapter 13. And I'm going to start at verse 10, and it reads. It says, which things when Judas perceived, he commanded the multitude to call upon the Lord night and day, that if ever at any other time he would now also help them, being at the point to be put from their law, from their country, and from the holy temple. So he encouraged them to pray night and day, you know, encouraged them to strengthen themselves in the Lord. You know, that's something we can remember Judas Maccabeus for, you know. So let's get 2 Maccabees. I'm going to get this real quick. 2 Maccabees chapter 5. This is 2 Maccabees chapter 5, and I want to start at verse 25. 2 Maccabees chapter 5 and 25. It says, who coming to Jerusalem and pretending peace did forbear till the holy day of the Sabbath. When taking the Jews keeping holy day, he commanded his men to arm themselves. And so he slew all them that were gone to the celebrating of the Sabbath, and running through the city with weapons, slew great multitudes. But Judas Maccabeus with 9 others or thereabout withdrew himself into the wilderness and lived in the mountains after the manner of beasts. So they withdrew themselves and went into the woods, you know, went into the mountains, you know, where all the beasts are, man. You know, most people, they'll be afraid, you know. They'll say, man, I might get ate out there, you know, something might bite me out there, you know, but that wasn't his mindset, you know. So he said, 1 Maccabees 5 and 27, but Judas Maccabeus with 9 others or thereabout withdrew himself into the wilderness and lived in the mountains after the manner of beasts with his company, who fed on herbs continually, lest they should be partakers of the pollution. So they didn't have the best food, you know. They fed off herbs in the wilderness, you know, and they did at least they be overthrown. Just imagine that. You know, many would have said, many people would have said, you know, man, I ain't got nothing to eat out there. I ain't gonna be able to eat. They would have came up with many excuses. But this is something we can remember Judas Maccabeus on. When our back is against the wall, when we gotta continue to fight for our people, you know, fight for our households, you know. I want to get another 2 Maccabees chapter 8. This is the book of 2 Maccabees chapter 8 and verse 1, and it reads, it says, then Judas Maccabeus and they that were with him went privily into the towns and called their kinfolks together and took unto them all such as continued in the Jews' religion, and assembled about 6,000 men. And they called upon the Lord that he would look upon the people that was trodden down of all, and also pity the temple profaned of ungodly men, and that he would have compassion upon the city, sore defaced and ready to be made even with the ground, and hear the blood that cried unto him, and remember the wicked slaughter of harmless infants, and the blasphemies committed against his men, committed against his name, and that he would shew his hatred against the wicked. Now when Maccabeus had his company about him, he could not be withstood by the heathen, for the wrath of the Lord was turned into mercy. You see that? So he called together his nation, you know. And that's a mighty act right there. That's a mighty act. So let me get this right quick. 2 Maccabees chapter 2. That's a mighty act. You know, we got to remember what the Most High allows us to understand. You know, now before I get that, I want to get this also. This is, let me get this in Romans. This is the book of Romans chapter 15. And I'm going to start at verse 4. It says, Romans chapter 15 verse 4, it says, for whatsoever things were written aforetime were written for our learning, that we, through patience and comfort of the scriptures, might have hope. So, hey, this is written for our learning. Everything we're reading about, and even to the extent of keeping the feast of dedication, it's for our learning. You know, it's something that we can take heed to and apply our works and apply ourselves to, just like that. You know, hey, let's go look at Paul too. Let me get this real quick in Philippians. Now this is Philippians chapter 1, and I'm going to start at verse 12. Because Apostle Paul got overthrown in many occasions too. Now this is Philippians chapter 1, and I'm going to start at verse 12. It says, but I would ye should understand, brethren, that the things which happened unto me have fallen out rather unto the furtherance of the gospel. So the same thing that Paul went through, you know, it happened so the gospel could be magnified, so the word of the Most High could be magnified. What Paul went through, it was done so the Israelites that was accustomed to the Gentile ways, they can understand, okay, look, we aren't Gentiles, we are Israelites, you know. Verse 13, Philippians 1 and 13, it says, so that my bonds in Hamashiach are manifest in all the palace and in all other places. And many of the brethren in the Lord, waxing confident by my bonds, are much more bold to speak the word without fear. So, hey, the same way Paul was persecuted, was shipwrecked, was going from council to council, you know, it was making others more confident, you know. And the same thing with Judas Maccabeus, you know, was making others more confident, you know. So let's go back to this. Second Maccabees chapter 2, and I want to start at verse 14. It says, it says, in like manner also Judas gathered together all those things that were lost by reason of the war we had, and they remain with us. Wherefore, if ye have need thereof, send some to fetch them unto you, whereas we then are about to celebrate the purification we have written unto you, and ye shall do well if ye keep the same days. We hope also that the Most High God, that delivered all his people and gave them all heritage, so like it, and gave them all an heritage and the kingdom and the priesthood and the sanctuary, as he promised in the law, will shortly have mercy upon us and gather us together out of every place, land under heaven, into the holy place, for he had delivered us out of great troubles and have purified the place. So, Judas, a mighty man that feared the Most High and the laws of the Most High as well. So reading on, a couple more verses. Second Maccabees chapter 2 verse 19. It says, now as concerning Judas Maccabeus and his brethren, and the purification of the great temple, and the dedication of the altar, and the wars against Antiochus Epiphanes, and Eupator his son, and the manifest signs that came from heaven unto those that behaved themselves manfully to their honor for Judaism, knowing the Israelites, so that being but a few, they overcame the whole country and chased barbarous mute multitudes, and recovered again the temple, renowned in all the world over, and freed the city, and upheld the laws which were going down. So he upheld the laws which were going down, and those that was being wrongfully judged. the Lord being gracious unto them with all favor. And these things, I say, being declared by Jason of Serene in 5 books, we will essay to abridge in 1 volume. For considering the infinite number and the difficulty which they find that desire to look into the narrations of the story for the variety of the matter, it says, we have been careful that they that will read may have delight, and that they that are desires to commit to memory might have ease, and that all into whose hands it comes might have profit. So, hey, this thing is to be remembered and to shown upon that, hey, this is a very important high holy day. You know, this is something very beautiful, you know, and something that's even going to be more magnified in the days to come, you know. Now, I want to get another precept right quick. Now, this is Sirach chapter 4. You know, because the Most High going to do many more things than this. He's going to overthrow these heathens on a more mightyful way than this. Now, this is Sirach chapter 4 and verse 28, and it reads, it says, strive for the truth unto death, and the Lord shall fight for thee. And that's what the Maccabees did. That's what Judas did, you know. That's what our forefathers did. They strive for the truth unto death, which is a beautiful thing to do, you know, because once you do that, the Lord will fight for you, you know. So how can we forget, you know, what the Caucasians did, man? How can we forget what the Edomites did? Now, I want to get this real quick, because they carry that same spirit of Cain, you know, overthrowing households, killing Israelites, you know, rape, robbing, and murdering. So this is 1 John. How can we forget what the Caucasians did, man? You know, ever since they've, you know, been known for their vile ways, nothing has changed. So this is 1 John chapter 3. Nothing has changed. 1 John chapter 3, and I'm going to start at verse 12. It says, it's like I'm going to start at verse 11. I'm going to start at verse 10. This whole thing is mighty. 1 John chapter 3, verse 10, it says, in this the children of God are manifest, and the children of the devil. So the children of the Most High God is going to be manifest, and the children of the so-called white man is going to be manifest as well. Children of Hashatan, Satan, you know. It says, whosoever doeth not righteousness is not of Most High God, neither he that loveth not his brother. It says, for this is the message that ye heard from the beginning, that we should love one another, not as Cain, who was of that wicked one, and slew his brother. And wherefore slew he him? Because his own works were evil, and his brother's righteous. You see that? And so not just only Esau and Jacob, you know, not just only Cain and Abel, but as well as Judas, you know, avenging and protecting his nation. And then you got Antiochus, you know, he even killed his own people. You got Alexander, even kill his own people. You got Darius, even kill his own people, you know. But we gonna stand up for righteousness. We gonna stand up for our people, you know. And like it says in Genesis, let me get Genesis chapter 4, you know, because, hey, Cain, hey, the same thing. That's why we read in Mark chapter 15, it says Satan against Satan, a house divided, it won't stand. So this is Genesis chapter 4 in verse 8. It says, and Cain talked with Abel his brother, and it came to pass when they were in the field that Cain rose up against Abel his brother and slew him, you know. So they just got that cold-blooded murder spirit. It's on them, you know. It's always been on them, you know. Broad daylight, they'll kill you, you know. It don't matter if it's broad daylight, they gonna kill you. Nighttime, they gonna kill you, you know. They're gonna do some wicked, vile acts, because that's just how they get down, you know. Let me get Psalms real quick. Psalm 78. This is the book of Psalms, chapter 78. How can we forget Caucasians, man? How can we forget what these Edomites did? You know? And we would read from, you know, the Black Holocaust, some more extensive things that these Edomites did, but, you know, we're going to leave that and we're going to save that for another day, Lord willing. You know? This is Psalm 78, and I want to start at verse 18. And it reads, it says, I'm going to start at verse 17. And they sinned yet more against him by provoking the Most High in the wilderness. And they tempted the Most High God in their heart by asking meat for their lust. It says, and they tempted the Most High God in their heart by asking him meat for their lust. Yea, they spake against Most High God. They said, can Most High God furnish a table in the wilderness? Behold, he smote the rock, that the waters gush out and the streams overflow. Can he give bread also? Can he provoke flesh for his people? Now, this is one thing, you know, that came from heathens, you know, something that came from these Egyptians, something that came from the other nations, you know, blaspheming the Most High, you know, and it transpired down to the Israelites. And then they began to provoke Moses. They began to provoke Aaron, you know. But more so, hey, you got other nations, they blaspheme against the Most High. But one thing that Israelites learned was the wickedness of these other nations, you know. They learned the wickedness of the other nations, you know. Now, I want to get Psalms real quick. It's the book of Psalms 105. So you had Egyptians that was lusting and trying to cleave into Israelites. And Israelites started to get off on that, you know. Now, let me get this real quick. This is, I want to start at, this is Psalms 105. I'm going to start at verse 31. Psalms 105, it's like Psalms 106 and 31. It says, and that was counted unto him for righteousness unto all generations forevermore. They angered him also at the waters of strife, so that it went ill with Moses for their sakes, because they provoked his spirit, so that he spake unadvisedly with his lips. They did not destroy the nations concerning whom the Lord Yahweh commanded them, but were mingled among the heathen and learned their works. And they served their idols, which were a snare unto them. So how in the world, during the time of Moses and Aaron, did they know about idols? Because, hey, look, they seen that with the Egyptians, you know. And so it was still on their minds. It was still on their spirits. And so this is why it's important for us to remember Judas and the acts of our forefathers, as well as Moses and a lot of other mighty men that was before us. Because even during the time during Elijah, you know, when Elijah had to kill all of those idols and destroy all of those idols and those false prophets, if you don't get rid of that wickedness and that folly and that madness, it can overthrow you, you know. So a lot of wicked Israelites, they got to get cut down too, or else another Israelite, he gonna do the same thing that he seen his brother do, or another Israelite woman gonna do the same thing that she seen another Israelite sister do. That's why a lot of wickedness got to be cleansed, you know, on a physical scale and on a literal, spiritual scale. Now, I want to get Job chapter 20, because we did read about how the infants was overthrown too. Now, I want to get Job chapter 20, and then we're going to read a little bit more of that too, because he did hang some of these infants in the Maccabees. Now, this is Job chapter 20. And Job chapter 20 is a lot. It's a lot in here, but we're not going to read all of this. So we're just going to touch on some of these parts. Job chapter 20, and I want to start at verse 19. It says, Job chapter 20 and 19, it says, because he hath oppressed and hath forsaken the poor, because he had violently taken away a house which he builded not. So why in the world would these Greeks overthrow a sanctuary that's not even theirs, that they didn't build? Spoiling goods that's not even theirs, you know? Overthrowing righteous things that's not even theirs. And that's how they been getting down, you know? Job even said this, you know? Even when you read the book of Job, they overthrow houses that's not even theirs, you know? It says, Job chapter 20, verse 20, surely he shall not feel quietness in his belly. He shall not save of that which he desire. There shall none of his meat be left. Therefore shall no man look for his goods. In the fullness of his excellence, in the fullness of his sufficiency, he shall be in straits. Every hand of the wicked shall come upon him. And this is why the Most High is going to bring a more swift judgment upon them, because of what they've done. They overdone being wicked. You know, they went overboard. Now, also, let's go back to 2nd Maccabees. Let's go back to 2nd Maccabees. So, like, I want to go to 1st Maccabees first. 1st Maccabees, and I want to go to... I want to get this real quick. This is 1st Maccabees. First Maccabees chapter 1, and I'm going to start at verse 58. First Maccabees 1 and 58, because hey, we can't forget what these heathens did. First Maccabees 1 and 58, it says, thus did they by their authority unto the Israelites every month, to as many as were found in the cities. Now the 25th day of the month they were. Now the 25th day of the month they did sacrifice upon the idol altar, which was upon the altar of Most High God. At which time, according to the commandment, they put to death certain women. So these Caucasians, these Greeks, these wicked so-called white people, they put certain Israelite women to death that had caused their children to be circumcised. And they hanged the infants about their necks and rifled their homes and slew them that had circumcised them. You see that? It says, howbeit many in Israel were fully resolved and conformed, and confirmed in themselves not to eat any unclean thing. Wherefore they chose rather to die, that they might not be defiled with meats, and that they might not be profane, and that they might not profane the holy covenant. So then they died. So they hung infants, you know, they killed women, you know, they had harlots in the temple, you know, and these are wicked acts that, you know, the Greeks did. So also, let's go to 2nd Maccabees, you know, because these are a lot of vile, wicked things that these wicked Caucasians did. So this is 2nd Maccabees. I want to start at chapter 6. And I want to start at verse 1. 2nd Maccabees chapter 6 and verse 1. It says, not long after this, the king sent an old man of Athens to compel the Jews to depart from the laws of their fathers, and not to live after the laws of God, and to pollute also the temple in Jerusalem, and to call it the temple of Juniper Olympius, and that in Gazarim of Juniper, the defender of strangers, as they did desire that dwelt in the place. The coming in of this mischief was sore and grievous to the people, for the temple was filled with riot and reveling of the Gentiles, who dealt with harlots and had to do with women within the circuit of the holy place. So they brought harlots into the temple as well. Not just only swine's flesh, but harlots. You know. It says the altar also, 2nd Maccabees 6 and 5, the altar also was filled with profane things, which the law forbidden. So, you know, we can't forget what they've done. You know, you cannot forget what they've done. Now I want to get this real quick. Now this is Psalms chapter 55, and they'll make it seem like they're going to make a covenant of peace with you, but they'll turn around and it'll be lies that they're going to speak. Now this is Psalms chapter 55 and verse 21, and it reads, it says, I'm going to start at verse 20. Psalms 55 and 20. It says, he has put forth his hands against such as be at peace with him. He had broken his covenant. And that's what they did to Judas as well. And they tricked them in thinking that they was going to make an agreement in a peaceful alliance. But they did it just to kill him. You know. Psalms 55 and 21. It says, the words of his mouth was smoother than butter, but war was in his heart. His words were softer than oil, yet were they drawn swords. It says, cast thy burden upon the Lord Yahweh, and he shall sustain thee. He shall never suffer the righteous to be moved. But thou, O Most High God, shalt bring them down into the pit of destruction. Bloody and deceitful men shall not live out half their days, but I will trust in thee. And this is well spoken of by King David, you know, that we should trust in the Lord. And we got to continue to look upon a lot of the things that our forefathers stood on in the behalf of them fighting. And, you know, it's important for us to continue to remember how our forefathers put their lives on the line and they stood for righteousness, you know. Now, I want to get this real quick. And this is Jeremiah chapter 5, and I want to start at verse 3. It says, O Lord Yahweh, are not thine eyes upon the truth? Thou hast stricken them, but they have not grieved. Thou hast consumed them, but they have refused to receive correction. They have made their faces harder than a rock. They have refused to return. Therefore I said, surely these are poor. They are foolish, for they know not the way of the Lord Yahweh, nor the judgment of their God. I will get me unto the great men. So you got to get yourself unto the great men, you know. And you had some that sold out. You know, you had some that were just being wicked and vile and consented to the heathens. But we got to, hey, like Jeremiah said, we will get unto great men. We got to do this on a literal sense too, you know, because you got some of your own people that sell out. You know, when fear kicks in, hey, they'll join the other team. They'll join the other side. So Jeremiah 5 and 5, it says, I will get me unto the great men and will speak unto them, for they have known the way of the Lord Yahweh and the judgment of their God Most High. But these have altogether broken the yoke and burst the bonds. So we got to get unto the great men, you know, and we got to do the work of the Lord, as we got to continue to have, you know, the same attributes and the same traits that Judas Maccabeus had, that Jonathan had, that Simon had, as well as more of our forefathers through the spirit and the power of Yahweh Shem Shah. Lord willing, I didn't want this to be too long, but we also got to get going. Lord willing, you can keep the Feast of Dedication continue to the best of your ability, those that are keeping it, you know. And Lord willing, you can close it out mighty through the spirit and power of Yahweh Shem Shah, having the spirit of righteousness to the best of your ability, forsaking the cares in the flesh, the cares of this world, and forsaking your flesh to the best of your ability as well, you know, because it's about rededicating your temple, cleansing your temple, you know, renew your mind, cleanse that temple, because, hey, it's important for us to continue to fight and to be ready when the Lord comes on the earth for the second time. So this is Isaiah 26 and 3. It says, thou would keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on thee, because he trusted in thee. Trust ye in the Lord Yahweh forever, for in the Lord Yahweh is everlasting strength. By Shema Mashak Yahushua. Now let me get this real quick. In St. John, through the spirit and power of Yahweh Shema Shah. Let me get this in St. John. Now this is St. John chapter 21 And I'm going to start at verse 20. It says, so like I'm going to start at verse 18. It says, St. John 21:18, verily, verily, I say to thee, when thou wast young, thou girdest thyself, and walkest whither thou wouldest. But when thou shalt be old, thou shalt stretch forth thy hand, and another shall gird thee, and carry thee whither thou wouldest not. So, hey, we either gonna be put to death, or we, gonna be alive and remaining until the Lord comes back. Only the Lord knows. But regardless if we live or regardless if we die, we got to continue to follow the Lord. We continue to believe on the Lord, continue to have faith and hope in the Lord, and to continue to have the spirit of truth that the Lord has commanded us to have. John 21:19, it says, this spake he, signifying by what death he should glorify God. So, hey, like Peter, he had to glorify God until the end too. And like Judas, he had to glorify God until the end too. And when he had spoken this, he said unto him, follow me. So Yahushua told Peter that he was gonna have to die. And that could have shadowed, and that could have rattled, and that could have shook Peter's faith. But it didn't. He continued to follow the Lord. And so we got to do the same thing. So, hey, Lord willing, this was edifying to you. Don't count this as a light thing to do. All praise to Yahweh Shem Yahushua. Continue to keep the feast of dedication to the best of your ability. And Lord willing, the many more feast days that the Lord allows to keep until he returns back. Peace and blessing to you. All praise and glory, honor to Yahweh in the name of his son Yahushua. Call Yahweh by Shem Yahushua. Happy feast of dedication.